Have you ever felt stuck in a place that looks perfectly normal, maybe even comforting, but deep down, something inside you knows it's draining your spirit? Like a flame running out of oxygen. You go back because it's familiar, but every time you leave, a piece of you feels more disconnected, more distant from who you're supposed to become. Carl Jung believed that the most dangerous prisons are the ones we can't see, not made of steel or concrete, but of memory, fear, and false identity. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And for so many people, fate looks like staying in places that quietly shrink the soul. These aren't just physical places, they're emotional environments, energetic cages, realms we wander in without realizing we're spiritually asleep. He spoke about these places not in headlines or slogans, but in symbols, archetypes, stories. Because Jung understood something most people still don't. You're not just trying to find yourself, you're trying to escape what's been keeping you lost. And while each of the 6 places we'll explore has its own shadow, it's the 6th and final one you cannot afford to miss, because it's the most deceptive of them all. The one that wears the face of love, but quietly drains your will to leave. Stay with me till the end, because that last place, it could be the very reason your soul hasn't truly begun its journey home. This isn't just a list, it's a path, a dismantling, a mirror. So let's begin with the first, the place that smiles like safety, but grips you like a grave. That place is home. Now, don't get me wrong, home should be the safest space, a foundation, a place of rest and growth. But what happens when the home becomes more than shelter? What happens when it turns into a womb you never quite leave? Carl Jung believed that one of the first spiritual traps is the home that protects you so much. It prevents you from ever becoming independent emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It's not just about still living in your parents' house, it's about being emotionally tethered to a past version of yourself that the home represents. You know that feeling when you visit the place you grew up and suddenly all your confidence disappears. Your voice shrinks, your old habits resurface, and without even realizing it, you're no longer the person you've become. You're the child they still see. Why does that happen? Because the house still holds the old roles, the old power dynamics, and if no one ever updates their view of you, including you, it traps your spirit in the past. Growth becomes disobedience. Independence feels like betrayal. Maybe your parents still guilt you for not calling every day. Maybe your relatives can't handle the fact that you're not following their version of success. Or maybe you keep returning, physically or emotionally, to that home out of fear because the outside world feels uncertain. Jung saw this as a dangerous block to individuation, the process of becoming your true, whole self. He believed that staying psychologically tied to the parental complex, especially the mother archetype, prevents us from crossing the threshold into maturity. And make no mistake, this isn't about blaming your mother. It's about recognizing when comfort becomes captivity. Think about it. How many people live their whole lives making decisions that revolve around not disappointing their families, never leaving their hometown, never choosing a career or a partner that strays too far from the approved list. And then, at 45, they wonder why they feel invisible in their own story. So let me ask you this. Are you living your life, or are you still rehearsing a version of yourself that keeps the peace back home? Because if the home becomes a place you return to out of fear, not love, it's no longer a sanctuary, it's a spell. And that spell, it keeps you spiritually unborn. But the next place is even more insidious. Because unlike the home, it doesn't pretend to just care for you. It claims to speak for something higher. Let's talk about the second spiritually trapping place Carl Jung warned about, the Church of Fear. Now, before we go any further, let's be clear. This isn't about attacking faith or religion. Jung had deep respect for spirituality. He even said, bidden or unbidden, God is present. But he also believed that when belief is built on fear, not love, it stops being a spiritual path and becomes a psychological prison. So how does a place of worship become a place of bondage? when it's used to control rather than liberate. Many people sit in pews every week, reciting words they were taught to say as children, but deep down they're terrified. Terrified of making mistakes, of being punished, of asking questions, terrified of disappointing a version of God they've never really spoken to, only feared. Have you ever seen someone so afraid of sinning that they stop living? They suppress joy, bury their desires, live in constant guilt, not because their soul is at peace, but because they've been taught that obedience is safer than authenticity. Jung saw this pattern as a distortion of the sacred. He believed that when spiritual spaces are ruled by dogma instead of inner transformation, they sever us from the very essence of the divine. Instead of guiding people toward individuation, the integration of the whole self, they demand uniformity, silence, shame. It's no wonder why so many people leave religious spaces feeling not healed, but haunted. In today's world, this trap shows up in more ways than ever. From prosperity gospel to online communities that weaponize scripture, faith has become a performance for some, and for others, a source of deep trauma. But ask yourself this: does your spiritual path lead you closer to your true self, or only to a version of you that fits into someone else's idea of holiness? Because when your belief system is rooted in fear, you're not connecting with God, you're negotiating with a warden. And Jung would say, what you repress in the name of religion doesn't disappear, it hides in the shadow, and it waits. But what if you're not at home? What if you're not in a church? What if the trap you're in is disguised not by silence, but by constant sound? This brings us to the third spiritually trapping place Carl Jung would caution us about: the city of noise. We live in a world that never shuts up. Phones buzzing, screens glowing, ads screaming, opinions flying. Somewhere between the podcasts, playlists, traffic horns, and endless scrolling, you forget what your own thoughts sound like. Jung didn't live in the age of smartphones, but his insights feel eerily prophetic. He warned that the modern person is so occupied with outward matters that they lose all connection with the inner world. That's what happens when noise becomes your default state. You become distracted from your inner life and eventually divorced from it. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat in complete silence? Not just without sound, but without reaching for distraction. For many people, silence is unbearable, because when the world goes quiet, the things we've buried begin to speak. That unresolved pain, that ignored desire, that forgotten dream. In the city of noise, we drown out these inner truths with stimulation, not because we're addicted to sound, but because we're afraid of hearing the truth. Think about how many people wake up and immediately grab their phone, not because they're curious, but because they're scared of sitting with themselves for even 5 minutes. The city of noise doesn't have to be a literal city. It's any life filled with enough distractions to keep you numb, but functional. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to withdraw from the crowd, at least for a while. To disconnect from the collective voice so we can recognize our own. But that's difficult in a world where we've confused stimulation with meaning. And that's the trap. You stay busy enough to feel alive without ever asking if you're actually living. So let me ask you, what are you really avoiding when you stay constantly connected? Because the longer you live in the city of noise, the more likely it is that your spirit is shouting, but you've forgotten how to listen. But even worse than being drowned out is being forced to wear a mask. This leads us to the fourth spiritually trapping place Jung warned about: the mirror of performance. It's not a literal mirror. It's a space where your value is constantly measured by how well you perform, how polished your image is, how impressive your resume sounds, how perfect your smile looks on a Zoom call. In today's world, this trap shows up everywhere, from corporate offices and social media platforms to classrooms and family dinners. It's any environment where being your authentic self feels like a liability, and the only way to survive is to perform, Carl Jung called this the realm of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society. It's necessary to some extent. We all have roles, but when the mask becomes more real than the person behind it, you start living for the applause, not for your soul. Think about it. How many people go to jobs they hate, say things they don't believe, post pictures they don't care about, just to maintain an image, just to feel like they're succeeding in a world built on expectations? You show up every day, say the right things, smile at the right moments, and slowly you lose track of where the act ends and you begin. Jung believed this performance culture disconnects us from our inner truth, because in order to be truly whole, we must confront not only what's lovable about us, but also what's raw, hidden, and imperfect. But when you're stuck in the mirror of performance, there's no space for that. Vulnerability is punished. Silence is seen as weakness. Authenticity becomes a threat to the system you're trying to survive in. So let me ask you, how much of your life is a performance? Who would you be if there was no one to impress? Because here's the trap. The more you succeed at playing a role, the harder it is to stop acting. And over time, the applause becomes addictive, even if you're dying behind the curtain. But what happens when that performance becomes reinforced by the people around you? Not just one-on-one, but by entire communities, feeding you only what you already believe. That's where we go next. A place that feels empowering, but is actually designed to keep you blind. So what happens when your performance isn't just accepted, but celebrated? When people around you don't just tolerate the mask, they cheer for it. That takes us into the fifth spiritually trapping place Carl Jung would warn us about, the echo chamber. An echo chamber isn't just a place, it's a pattern, a loop, a social and psychological space where the only voices you hear are reflections of your own. Your beliefs are affirmed, your opinions are mirrored, and dissent that's filtered out, silenced, or blocked entirely. At first glance, it feels empowering, comforting even. You're surrounded by people who get you, who think the same way, who validate your worldview. But here's the danger. Growth doesn't happen where everyone agrees with you. Carl Jung believed that the path to individuation, the integration of your true self, requires tension, friction, discomfort. You need opposing views, challenging conversations, and the humility to admit when you're wrong. Without it, you're not evolving. You're just reinforcing a version of yourself that never changes. Think about how social media works. Algorithms feed you content that aligns with what you already engage with. Political opinions, spiritual ideas, lifestyle choices, all curated to match your preferences. Before long, you start to believe that your version of the world is the only one that makes sense, and anyone outside of it, they're just wrong or crazy. But ask yourself, when was the last time you sat with a perspective that made you uncomfortable and truly tried to understand it without defending your ego? Because in the echo chamber, disagreement feels like a threat to identity, and that's the trap. Your spiritual life becomes shallow, reactive, performative. You stop thinking, you stop listening, and eventually, you stop becoming. Jung would say that the unconscious thrives in places like this, because when you're only seeing what you want to see, the parts of you that need the most healing stay hidden, and loud agreement becomes a distraction from deep work. And here's the twist. Not all echo chambers are digital. Some are families, some are friend groups, some are ideological bubbles that reward obedience and exile anyone who thinks differently. So here's the question. Are you growing in your circle, or just getting louder with people who look and sound just like you? Because there's a difference between community and conformity. But if this place has been subtle and mental, the final place is different. It's not just psychological, it's emotional, intimate, and it's the hardest one to leave, because you might still believe it's love. Carl Jung understood that some of the deepest spiritual entrapments don't come from institutions or systems, but from relationships that feel like home, and yet keep you emotionally small. This sixth place is the relationship that feels like home, but not in the way you think. It's not about romantic love alone. It can be a best friend, a partner, even a mentor, anyone whose presence feels so familiar, so emotionally intense that you confuse it with safety, even when it's rooted in your unhealed past. Have you ever met someone and thought, it's like I've known them forever, only to later realize you were recreating the emotional dynamics of childhood? That familiarity wasn't destiny, it was a trigger, a reenactment. Jung called this projection of the anima or animus, the unconscious tendency to cast parts of ourselves onto others, especially the ones we fall for or deeply bond with. Here's where it gets dangerous. You feel seen, but only in the ways that confirm your wounds. You feel needed, but only when you suppress your needs. And somehow, walking away feels like dying, even when staying is quietly eroding your soul. How does that happen? Because the relationship mirrors your unfinished story. The parent you could never please, the sibling who always outshone you, the lover who gave you breadcrumbs but made you believe that's all you deserved. Jung believed that these relationships are among the most difficult to leave, not because of love, but because of identification. You don't just love the other person, you believe your survival is tied to them. And yet, spiritual growth demands separation, not necessarily physical distance, but emotional detachment, a clear-eyed awareness of who they are, who you are, and what this connection is doing to your becoming. So ask yourself, are you in a relationship that expands your soul or one that keeps you looping in patterns you promised you'd outgrow? Because if love keeps you stagnant, it's not love, it's nostalgia for a self that no longer exists. And that's the real trap. The people who feel most like home might be the very reason you never left. But awareness is the first step toward freedom. So now that we've walked through all 6 places Carl Jung believed can keep your spirit trapped, here's the question that matters most. What do you do with this awareness? This final part is about exactly that, the inner exit door. Because no matter how deeply embedded you are in one of these traps, Jung believed that freedom isn't found by running from them, but by turning inward and confronting why you were drawn to them in the first place. You see, none of these places, home, church, noise, performance, echo chambers, or relationships, are inherently evil. What makes them dangerous is when they stop being places you choose and start becoming places you submit to unconsciously. Jung wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." You've been looking outside for a long time, for approval, for peace, for escape, but the exit isn't out there. It never was. The exit is inner work. It's painful clarity. It's stepping back from roles, beliefs, and attachments long enough to ask, who am I when I'm no longer performing for love or belonging? Maybe for you, the real trap wasn't just your hometown or that church pew or the job title that looks impressive on paper. Maybe it was the idea that staying small was safer than risking rejection. But staying small has a cost. It kills your intuition, it numbs your purpose, and it silences the voice that was trying to guide you home all along. So here's where you begin. Start listening to what you avoid. Start sitting in silence longer than feels comfortable. Start questioning the places, people, and patterns that feel most familiar. Because spiritual freedom doesn't come from burning everything down. It comes from waking up while still inside it and choosing to leave with clarity, not bitterness. You don't need to escape the world. You need to reclaim your place in it with your eyes open. So I'll leave you with this. Which of these 6 places are you still visiting, even when your soul is begging you to leave? And more importantly, are you ready to answer back? If this resonated with you, don't just click away. Share your story in the comments. Reflect, rewatch, begin the work. Because freedom starts not when you fight your traps, but when you recognize them and walk out one conscious step at a time.